Alright, so 2019 is already over, and everybody's made their end of the year top 10 movies list, so I felt inspired to create a list of my own, if it's not too late. Except I don't think I've seen 10 movies that came out this year, so instead of doing a top 10 list, I'm just gonna rank the movies I saw instead. Of course, this is my own opinion, so don't treat any of my ideas as established facts of the universe or anything. I really am only making this because I saw a lot of movies in 2019 that I never really got the chance to talk about. So might as well do so now, before it's too late. Anyway, starting from worst to best. Number 9, Jumanji 2. So I write all the scripts for my videos, right? And I had this whole video done and was ready to record when I just remembered that this thing existed and I saw it. So I'm placing its inclusion here at the bottom of the list. It's incredibly not funny, has some really unnecessarily slow pacing at the beginning, and is a total headache to keep track of which character is which after they all swap bodies like 3 times. The saving grace for a lot of dumb movies like this is at least you can say they're funny, but I think I laughed like maybe 3 times during the whole movie. So I give Jumanji 2 a 1 out of 10. Fun fact, I wasn't even trying to see this movie. I went with my family to see Frozen 2, but the theater was packed, so we settled for this. Bad decision. Number 8, Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. A few months ago, I made like a whole video laying out why this movie just couldn't be a good conclusion for the Star Wars saga, as I felt that The Last Jedi completed all of the established character arcs and left little for there to be concluded. Now that I've seen it, I feel like I was right, and that it is a significant factor as to why this movie sucks so much, but it's not the sole reason. The worst part of The Rise of Skywalker is the plot and pacing. It's completely unnecessarily bloated with an extended video game side quest style plotline that goes nowhere. It lasts for like an hour and a half and leaves no room for any actual character development or a finale. Another negative quality this movie suffers from as a result of its plot is its pacing. It's absolutely horrendous. The entire movie just feels like it's light speed skipping from scene to scene, location to location, introducing characters and ships and stuff without ever providing any context or any time to sit and breathe in any one spot. Additionally, there's simply too many newly introduced ideas and concepts that are so ridiculous and mostly unexplained that, along with the previous issues, make a movie that you can never really be invested in for more than a minute or so at a time before you're sucked out of the experience by something stupid or contrived. The only positive thing I can say about The Rise of Skywalker is that there is an element of camaraderie amongst the main heroes that is fun. It's forced, but it's fun. I give this movie a 3 out of 10. Number 7, It Chapter 2. I was really let down by this one. I don't remember what I exactly said about this movie in my review, but as of now, I've really come to dislike it, mostly because of how poor it is in comparison to Part 1. The main thing I had a problem with It Chapter 2 was the plot and pacing. Again, like The Rise of Skywalker, this movie spends way too long on needless plot details and side quests that accomplish, again, literally nothing at the end. There's also just way too many random jump scares or scary moments or monster attacks that feel out of place or unwarranted. The powers of Pennywise are unlimited and never explicitly explained. There's too many flashback scenes that don't need to be there. I don't know. It's just a mess of a film. Despite all of that though, the movie does manage to land a few major emotional beats and is pretty funny the whole time, even though it overextends the humor quite a bit. I give It Chapter 2 a 4 out of 10. Number 6, Avengers Endgame. After seeing it twice in theaters, I was convinced for a long while that Endgame was easily the best Avengers movie made to date and that it was perfect, but now that the hype has died down, I can see its flaws really clearly. The overall plot of the movie is kinda jank. A lot of the characters don't get proper arcs, or the arcs they have conclude before the movie begins. In Hulk's case, you'd expect him to have some sort of dramatic moment of being able to reconcile the Hulk and Bruce Banner sides of his being, especially since that was such a strong point for his character in Infinity War. But it just happens off-screen, in a time skip. It's unrewarding storytelling. Thor is just a fat joke the entire time, and Black Widow is completely forgotten about after her sacrifice. The ending battle sequence that everybody loves is still awesome, but if you take away the screaming movie theater audience, a large portion of the on-screen action becomes surprisingly dull and boring. For example, the presentation of the moment where Captain America wields Thor's hammer is completely flat and just barely passable for what can be entertaining. The music is dull, nobody says anything, and the physical back and forths are terribly uninspired in comparison to fights we've seen in previous MCU movies. But the ending battle, once all the heroes assemble, is still a great climactic moment, and Iron Man's sacrifice is still just as hard to watch. Avengers Endgame is a 6.5 out of 10 movie. Number 5. Dr. Sleep is everything I find appealing about the horror genre. It covers a broad emotional and tonal spectrum, deals with heavy themes such as coping with trauma and fighting alcoholism, and tells a wholesome message about using your gifts for the improvement of others, all the while being completely off the rails dark and disturbing. Like, we get to see Dan, the main character, comfort and aid the dying elderly into peace at their moments of death, which is the most wholesome and sweetest thing ever. And then later we get to watch some little kid get tortured and murdered for 5 minutes straight, which is not very wholesome. This broad tonal range is something only the horror genre can really capture, and Dr. Sleep, just like its predecessor The Shining, does it excellently. The fact that this movie is a sequel to The Shining is actually quite interesting because while these movies feel similar, the premises of them are so radically different. I think it's mostly due to the fact that this movie features actual villain characters. In most horror movies, the monster is typically just a force of nature, some unintelligible creature, or some entity that is beyond human understanding, as was the case in The Shining. But in this movie, the monsters are actually quite human and relatable. Like, their motivation is simply to postpone death, and since they have the option to escape dying, they forever chase immortality and do evil out of fear of death. It's a cool twist to see the villains acting out of fear instead of just the heroes. Apparently, this movie didn't do well at the box office, which is honestly just a huge shame. It wasn't perfect by any means, but it was pretty dang good. It's a 7 out of 10 movie. Number 4. How to Train Your Dragon 3. It's kind of hard for me to accurately review this movie since it's been so long since I've seen it, and also because I only saw it once, but I will do my best. From what I can remember, How to Train Your Dragon 3 hits a lot of emotional beats and works extremely well as a final entry into the series. It's visually beautiful and wonderfully animated. The villain character and his venomous dragons are really cool, and the humor is fairly spot on. The few downsides this movie has is with a certain side character trying to impress Hiccup's mom. Every time that character was on screen making the mom jokes, I don't know, it was kind of cringe. That and the major plot point that occurs about halfway in the film, where all the residents of Burke pack their bags and head off to find a new home, felt really contrived to me. But besides that, How to Train Your Dragon 3 is great. 8 out of 10 movie. With this movie in the bag, I think we can all say that How to Train Your Dragon is the best animated trilogy made in like the last 2 decades, if not the best trilogy in general. Number 3, Dragon Ball Super Broly. Technically released in 2018 in Japan, I'm counting it as a 2019 film because it came out in 2019 in the United States where I live. I have an infinite love for this movie. It essentially saved modern Dragon Ball. To provide some context as to what I mean by that, for the past few years, the movies and television series for Dragon Ball have all been plagued by this lackluster, blocky art style that consisted of rigid and lifeless animation. It wasn't bad technically, but clearly Dragon Ball could be so much more. So this movie was Toei's way of achieving Dragon Ball's full visual potential. Everything that Dragon Ball has been for the last decade was cast aside and reconstructed anew in order to achieve the best visual quality possible. And it did. The character animation, the background art, the coloring, the effects animation, the vehicle and planet designs, it's all top tier. It's quite honestly the best that Dragon Ball has ever looked. Ever. On top of all of that, the story is very good. Broly is such a good character in this, he's so lovable. The lore of the Saiyans and the Saiyan history and the destruction of planet Vegeta is also a great addition. The only downside to this movie, in my opinion, is the fact that the fight between Goku and Vegeta and Broly lasts for like half the runtime. Look, I like long Dragon Ball fights, I do. Like the fights that last hours. But there needs to be more than just pure fighting. There needs to be an emotional conflict driving the physical conflict that makes it worthwhile to watch for so long. And while there was some of that present in some parts, a huge portion of the fight is kind of just mindless spectacle. Which is kind of sad because the best part of the fight is Gogeta versus Broly, but it occurs so late in the movie that by the time it happens, you're just kind of hoping for it to be over. Regardless of that, I really love this movie. As an artist, I can generally tell when a movie has soul poured into it. It's obvious to me that this movie was a creation of passion and love. It's excellent. 8.5 out of 10 movie. Number 2, Invader Zim Enter the Florpus. I never thought in a million years Invader Zim would ever return to animation. For a solid 6 years or so, Invader Zim was just kind of like a fond memory I thought of sometimes as a crucial inspiration for my early artistic journey, but nothing more. I certainly never thought it would have much relevance in my life going forward, but then this movie happened. Basically everything I said about Dragon Ball Broly can be said about this movie. It's visually stunning, extremely funny, and tells a story that surprisingly has some heart to it. Which is interesting because I always felt that the tone and dark humor of the Invader Zim universe could not allow there to be any emotional depth, but somehow they made it work. I love the characters of Zim and Dib, and especially Gaz and Membrane for their return. They're all fantastic. It's strange to me because the movie feels like the show, as it was decades ago, but just improved in all the right ways. And that's the best thing about it. The humor literally feels like it belongs in the early 2000s, and it was so refreshing for me to return to that era of my life. I absolutely love the bombardment of it too. There's literally a joke like less than every 30 seconds. A lot of the humor isn't even in the dialogue, it's just like ridiculous visual or audio gags that you need to see this movie like 3 times to pick up on all of them. Now, if I had to complain about something, it would probably be the fact that this movie doesn't draw a close to the story. And if this movie is really the end of Invader Zim content forever, it does suck that we might never get a conclusion for this universe. But I understand that this movie wasn't made with the intention of being a conclusion, so it's alright. Honestly, Invader Zim Enter the Florpus is a perfect movie. 10 out of 10. Number 1, Joker. I think a part of what made me like Joker so much was how it somehow, for like no reason at all, became the most controversial movie of all time before anyone had actually seen it. Like, all of the blue check marks on Twitter were so up in arms about how this movie was supporting white supremacy, radical political groups, and gun violence, and no one had even seen the movie yet. People were so outraged for basically no reason. And then guess what? The movie came out and everybody shut up because it has quite possibly the most basic and wholesome message that you could ever find. Be kind and respectful to people. Also, its narrative advocates for supporting the mentally ill and economically disadvantaged. You cannot get a more liberal message than that. And somehow it was the political left, from the mainstream media to the gremlins on Twitter, that trashed it. It seems to me their hatred for Joker was born out of a misinterpretation of the movie's premise, caused by the fact that no one had seen it yet and it looked violent. Just another example of the outrage mob being outraged for no actual reason. Very typical of Twitter. Anyway, all of that unnecessary controversy definitely helped get this movie to make $1 billion, so that's really cool. There's really not much I can say about the qualities of the movie that haven't been rightly praised by just about everybody already. I guess the only thing I can really add to the conversation is that this movie just stuck in my brain after I saw it. I mean, I think about every movie I see for some period of time, but I could not stop thinking about Joker for like an entire week after I'd seen it for the first time. There's just so much good stuff to soak in. When a movie sticks around with me for that long, I take that as a sign that I've been really invested in it. And the only way to do that, for me, is to achieve every aspect of filmmaking to the highest degree. 11 out of 10 movie.